Most people think that early retirement is impossible for them. And this makes sense when you look at the statistics. The Federal Reserve reported that nearly 2/3 of people did not think they were on track to retire by 67, much less retire early. And another study by AARP revealed that 20% of people age 50 and above have no retirement savings at all. But just because very few people retire early does not mean it's impossible. And just take me for example. I'm on track to retire before I turn 30 years old. And that's not because I make a bunch of money from this YouTube channel, because I don't. Instead, it's because I follow the 3 simple steps that you have to get right if you want to retire early. I call this the M.S.I framework, and I'll explain it later. Now, I packed a ton of information into this video, including the simple math that makes early retirement possible, how to calculate what you need to retire early, the 3 basic steps that you have to get right, and how to use what I call the rule of 26 to reach financial freedom and retire early literally decades faster. And at the end, I'll talk about a huge mistake that so many people make with their money, which I call the 0x multiplier. But before I get into all of that, let me explain why I wanted to make this video in the first place. A couple of weeks ago now, I was talking to one of my good friends from college. And for context, she's about to start graduate school for a PhD in biology. And while I was talking to this friend of mine, who we'll call Sarah for the sake of this video, she said something which I thought was super interesting. Sarah is hardworking, she's smart, and she'll soon have a PhD in biology that has an average annual income of $95,000 as soon as you graduate. But despite all of that, Sarah said that she didn't know if she would ever be able to retire, at least not by the normal retirement age of 67. And this absolutely shocked me, because if Sarah can't retire early, even with a great education and a great job, then nobody can retire early. But here she was saying she didn't know if she would ever be able to retire, much less retire early. And the reason this was such a big surprise to me is when I started my career, I was also earning about $95,000 per year. But by my calculation, I was pretty sure I'd be able to retire by 30. And now I'm about 3 years into that journey, and if anything, I'm ahead of schedule. So to understand why I'll be able to retire literally decades faster than people who earn the same amount of money, I have to explain the simple math that makes early retirement possible. You can retire early once you are financially free. And I define financial freedom as when you can maintain the same standard of living for the rest of your life without earning any more money. And one way to reach financial freedom is to save up such a huge amount of money that it would never run out. But obviously, this is pretty hard. And for example, consider my friend Sarah. If she wanted to spend $80,000 per year and retire at age 50, then she would need $4 million to have enough money to live to 100. Except once you account for inflation, she would actually need way more than that. After adjusting for inflation, $1,000 50 years ago is the same as $6,367 today. So my friend Sarah would probably have to have a nest egg of somewhere between $10 to $20 million. So in other words, Sarah would have to win the lottery. But the reason that early retirement is possible, even for regular people, is there is a magical way to make even more money without working. It's called investing. I call this magic, but it's really not. Businesses know how to use money today to make more money tomorrow. So if you invest in a business, there's a very good chance you'll become more valuable with time. So instead of trading your time for more money, you can invest your money to continue to build wealth, even in retirement, which can at least partially offset your expenses. Investing is the secret sauce behind early retirement. And that's because investing is the only source of truly passive income that I know of. Everything else requires work. And there are multiple ways to invest. But investing in the stock market is the easiest, cheapest, and most common way to invest, so that's what I'll focus on. So at least in theory, you don't need to save up a massive nest egg that will never run out for the rest of your life. Instead, you can use your investment returns to offset your expenses and to keep up with inflation, which can extend your portfolio for decades. And if you can live off of just your investment returns, this can go on forever. Technically, you could get even richer in retirement. But there's just one problem. In practice, it is impossible to know exactly how much money you need to be financially free. You would have to see the future of the stock market and predict how long you'll live, which both happen to be really hard questions to answer. Trust me, a lot of people have tried. But there is a way to estimate about how much money you need to safely retire early. So let me explain how. There is a lot of good research that has gone into this question because it is so darn important. And what has emerged is a very famous concept which is often referred to as the 4% rule. And it's actually pretty simple to use, but there are a few special considerations which are really important to understand, but that I don't have time to explain in this video. And that's why I linked a complete guide to understanding the 4% rule in the video description. This video is just going to give you an overview, but there's a whole lot more information that you really should understand before you use this rule yourself. With that said, here's how the 4% rule works. Basically, through running a ton of simulations using historical data, researchers realized that withdrawing about 4% of a portfolio value every year is usually pretty safe even in retirement. So as long as you withdraw less than 4% of your original portfolio value and then adjust that amount for inflation every year, then you will probably not run out of money in retirement. In fact, you'll probably get even wealthier. So that means if you have $1 million in retirement savings, you could spend about $40,000 per year without worrying about running out of money, even if you adjust that $40,000 based on inflation. And for my friend Sarah, that means she no longer needs to save $10 to $20 million just to retire at age 50. If she wants to spend $80,000 per year, then all she would need to save is about $2 million. And don't get me wrong, that is still a ton of money, but that's definitely achievable without winning the lottery. And if you move the numbers around, you'll see that a 4% withdrawal rate corresponds to having 25 times your annual expenses in retirement savings. And if you want to be even safer, you can withdraw even less. A 3% withdrawal rate has never failed as far as I know, and that corresponds to a 33.3x multiplier. And of course, you can use this yourself to calculate how much money you need to save before retiring. As long as you know your annual expenses, you just need to multiply that number by something between 25 and 33, and you'll have a pretty good estimate of how much money you should save. Just keep in mind that what really matters is how much money you'll spend after you retire. And for a lot of people, that will be pretty close to what you spend now while you're still in your career. But if you plan to move or live a very different lifestyle after you retire than what you're living right now, then you want to make sure you account for that when you're calculating this number. And again, there's a whole guide on the 4% rule in the video description that goes into a lot more details that you should understand. But now you know how much money you need to be financially free. But now, how do you actually get there? What do you need to do to be able to retire early? Well, there are 3 basic steps that you have to get right. And I call this the M.S.I framework. And you really have to get all 3 of these steps right because each step depends on the step before it. And to start things off, I have to say something that is probably going to seem super obvious, but I have to say it anyway. You can't make money appear out of thin air. This sounds obvious, and it is. But it's worth saying because there is no way to reach financial freedom and retire early if you aren't making money from somewhere. There's just no magic tricks, and I wouldn't be on track to retire before I turned 30 if I didn't have a good income. If you need to save 25 times your annual expenses before you can retire, then you have to earn at least that much money, and probably much, much more before you'll be ready to retire. That's why the first step of the M.S.I framework is to make money, and the more the better. But I've said this a million times, and I'll say it a million times again. How much money you make does not matter at all if you just spend it all. Because your income is only potential energy, but the average American spends 90% of their income every year, which is why they have to work their entire lives. And I think this is why my friend Sarah was so concerned that she would never reach financial freedom. And so few people do reach financial freedom that a lot of people assume it must be impossible. But it's not impossible. You just have to do something that most people don't do. And it turns out that's actually kind of easy. Because most people are extremely wasteful and they spend almost their entire income. And no, that's not just because they're underpaid. If you look at the data yourself, you'll see that most people spend the vast majority of their income no matter how much money they make. And that's why it's not enough to just have a high-paying job. You have to disconnect your income from your expenses. And that's why the second step of the M.S.I framework is to spend less. Because the only money that makes you wealthier is the money that you keep. It is the difference between your income and your spending that actually builds wealth and gets you closer to financial freedom. But as we already talked about, you probably won't reach financial freedom if you just bury all of that money in your backyard and wait until you have millions and millions of dollars. If you want to retire early, there is one more step you need to do. Because if you want to have a long and wealthy retirement, and especially if you want to quit work while you're still young, then you have to use your savings to make a money-making machine. This will take care of your expenses in retirement and will make sure your savings don't get crushed by inflation. And that's why the third step of the M.S.I framework is to invest the rest. Take everything you don't spend and get that money working for you. This is the money that buys your freedom. So you have to do all three steps of the M.S.I framework if you want to retire early. But that doesn't mean that they're all equally important. And the reason I'll be able to retire before I turn 30 years old is because I focus so much of my attention on just one metric. So let me explain the rule of 26 and how you can use it to retire literally decades faster. When most people want to retire faster, they usually ask themselves, how can I make more money? But I actually think this is usually the wrong question. And don't get me wrong, more money is fantastic. And for people who are working low-paying jobs that don't take advantage of their full potential, or for people who are already doing everything else right, then this might be the best place to work on. But for most people, it is much more powerful to focus on spending less before worrying about earning more. And there's a reason for this. When you earn an extra dollar, you are $1 closer to financial freedom. Actually, it's less than that because of taxes, but we'll ignore that for now. But I want you to compare that to saving an extra dollar. When you save an extra dollar, you are also $1 closer to financial freedom. But much more importantly, you also need less money to retire. Using the 4% rule, you want to have $25 in retirement savings for every $1 that you spend every year. And if you're planning for an extra long retirement, you might want to save even more than that. So that means whenever you reduce your expenses by $1, you also need 25 to 30 less dollars to retire. And that's on top of the extra dollar that you're saving. That's why reducing your expenses by $1 is about 26 times more powerful than increasing your income by $1. And let me show you just how insanely powerful this can be. Throughout this video, I've been assuming my friend Sarah leaves college with a $95,000 per year salary and wants to spend about $80,000 per year. Saving the $2 million it would take to retire would take a little over 34 years. Maybe a little longer if she wanted to be even safer. So even using these numbers, there is no reason that my friend Sarah couldn't retire on time. But retiring early is another story. But here's the thing. Nobody needs to spend $80,000 per year. I live in an extremely expensive area and I spend about a quarter of that. So if my friend Sarah was able to live on $60,000 per year instead of $80,000, then two things would happen. One, she would be saving an extra $20,000 per year, which is obviously going to make a big difference. And then, even better, she wouldn't need nearly as much money to retire. If she could reduce her expenses by $20,000 per year, then she would need about $500,000 less dollars to retire. Yes, that is $500,000 less dollars in savings. All of a sudden, my friend Sarah would be on track to retire in about 20 years. That is 14 years faster than the previous scenario. And that's the power of the rule of 26. 20 years is not a long career. And remember that that's still assuming my friend Sarah spends $60,000 per year, which is still a super comfortable lifestyle. People can support an entire family on $60,000 per year. But this only works if you avoid a common trap that I've seen way too many people fall into. I call this the 0x multiplier, and you will never retire early if you fall into this trap yourself. In the last year, I've probably had 3 different friends all ask me about how to get started with investing. And I think every single one of them has asked me,
what is the minimum amount of money that I can invest?
And the answer is it depends on the company. I've seen anywhere from $0 to $2,000. But here's the thing. If you're thinking about the minimum amount of money that you can invest, then you're probably thinking about it wrong. In the next 10 years, $1,000 might turn into $2,000. And that's cool, that's an extra $1,000 that you wouldn't have had otherwise, but that's not life-changing money. And here's the real issue. Earning a great return on investment doesn't matter at all if you don't have any money to begin with. I call this the 0x multiplier because investment returns only multiply the money you've already saved and invested. And if that is $0, then you're still going to be worth nothing. So again, investing early is really important. But don't just take a few $100s and think that you're done. What actually matters is that you build the habit of investing. So here's what I want you to do. Every single week, or maybe every other week if you want to align it to when you get paid, I want you to commit to paying yourself first and set up an automatic contribution to your investment account. As for how much money to contribute, it really depends on your situation. But I would say as much as you can afford to. And for the average person in the US, I think $1,000 a month is a really good target. So about $250 per week. But again, that is a huge generalization. Some of you probably cannot afford that right now, and others of you are probably saving $1,000 a week. So just do what you can. As long as you earn as much as you can, spend as little as you can, and invest the difference, I can pretty much guarantee that eventually you'll be able to retire early. And no matter what, I hope you've realized that early retirement is not only possible, but it's actually pretty simple. But just because it's simple does not mean it's easy. If you want to retire early, you might have to make some big changes in your life. But that's why I made this video right here, where I explain a few of the money habits that will literally change your life in less than a year. I promise that video is worth your time, so check it out next, and I'll see you next time.